This is Johnny Dosco. Stay tuned for another Score Sheet podcast. Holy Kadelka!
Hello and welcome to another Score Sheet podcast. I'm happy to say that today we have Allan with us. Ian is the editor, publisher, and senior writer for Fantasy Football Index magazine. They also do Fantasy Baseball Index. How are you today, Ian?
I'm doing great, Jeff. Thanks.
It's good having you with us. So here we are a couple months before the start of the NFL season. People are getting ready for their fantasy football drafts coming up. You guys, your magazine hits the bookshelves here pretty soon, doesn't it?
Absolutely. We're going with a tight end on the cover this year, a little bit different. We're going with Rob Gronkowski on the cover this year. It's a little bit different, a tight end on the cover of a fantasy magazine. But over the last 20 years, tight ends keep getting more and more productive. Well, last year we had the two best tight ends ever, so we looked at that issue in this year's magazine.
You know, it's interesting you bring up tight ends because we just made a rule change this year in our game where we have a flex position. One of your offensive players, we've always let you start either a second running back or a third wide receiver. And this year we added you could start a second tight end instead of a running back or wide receiver, which 5-6 years ago would have been ludicrous.
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense. More and more teams are using two tight ends. I mean, everybody saw what happened in New England last year with Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez. Now teams are trying to copy that. You're going to see the Vikings are going to be using Carlson and Kyle Rudolph. The Chiefs are going to be using Boss and Tony Moeaki coming back from an injury. And the Colts spent their second and third picks on tight ends. So most teams are using two tight ends. Teams don't use fullbacks anymore. So it makes a lot of sense to get more of those guys on the field in fantasy games.
Yeah, and they're doing more than block, that's for sure. Like you said, New England had two guys scoring a lot of points. The 49ers, who I follow, you know, they've got Delaney Walker until he got hurt, was probably their second most productive receiver after Vernon Davis.
Well, over the last 20 years, if you just look at total number of catches, yards, and touchdowns by tight ends, it's gone up every single year. So those guys are viable players, so it makes a lot of sense either allow teams to start two or work guys in as a flex. Because if you say, hey, we're only going to start one tight end, then you have that problem of the team that doesn't draft a tight end until late. He's still going to get a great tight end in the 14th round. You know, he's going to pick up some guy. I'm just looking here at my draft board to see who I've got as the last guys. You know, you can get somebody like Gresham or Pettigrew or Dustin Keller's going to be your tight end, even though you're drafting those guys late. So we need more tight ends on the field. Makes a lot of sense to change the rules to accommodate those players.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that's really changed, I think, with fantasy is the running back by committee. There aren't very many teams that have just one running back anymore that gets the bulk of the carries.
Well, that's kind of a pet peeve of mine because I disagree. I've spent a lot of time looking at the numbers on that. If you go back and look at the teams, for example, the Miami Dolphins 1972 going way back, you know, they had a couple of 1,000-yard rushers. The Steelers had a pair of 1,000-yard rushers in 76, I believe. The Browns in the 80s had it. You know, so we've always had running back by committee. If you get out the numbers and look at how productive was the number 10 running back over the last 20 years, and the guys in recent years are right there with what you saw 20 years ago. So I kind of disagree. The issue that we're having is not running back by committee. It's that teams are passing more. They've changed the rules, and so you're seeing more passing and less rushing. But I don't buy into the running back by committee deal.
Oh, well, that's an interesting slant on it. So you think really that there just aren't as many rushing yards to divvy up?
Well, there's one other deal that we have with the running back committee, and that's teams don't use fullbacks anymore. Everybody used to have a guy like a Tom Rathman, a Rocky Bly, or a Matt Suey, and those fullbacks would run for 400 or 500 yards. Now teams don't have fullbacks that carry the ball, so we're going to need to have that second running back carry the ball a little bit more than in the past because it's not physically possible for running backs to handle, 300 carries. There's very few guys who can do that. But if you just look at the number of carries for running backs and look at maybe the 20th best running back right now versus all the, the last 20, 30 years, very little difference between the production.
So speaking of running backs, since I just made a trade, I traded Chris Johnson for Ryan Matthews. What do you think of that?
I think you got to just hope Ryan Matthews stays healthy, and then you're going to be a winner on that deal. He's missed, I think, at least 3 games 5 years in a row. in the pros and going back to Fresno State. So he's got to stay healthy. The other concern I have with Ryan Matthews is he going to carry at the goal line? I don't think he is. I think they're going to use LaRon McClain down there. He was a very good short yardage back with Baltimore, and I heard some talk about, hey, we want to use this guy down there. So I think McClain will take that Mike Tolbert role, and he may score 8 touchdowns.
So I better hope that they score from like the 20-yard line rather than get it down to the 1, because Matthews will come out of the game at that point.
Well, he's a good running back. He's going to catch a lot of balls, and he does have the speed. As his rookie year, he scored more touchdowns than anybody in the league from 10-plus yards. So, he's got a chance. But I'm saying instead of being a guy who's going to score 15, 20 touchdowns and be a true franchise-type guy, you're probably looking at more of a 10-touchdown type guy, and then the durability is an issue. You got to hope he can stay healthy.
Right. Well, at least in score sheet, we're more of actually a yardage and point per reception game than touchdown. So as long as he gets the yards and catches some balls and gets some receiving yards, I should be okay.
Well, I guess the key thing to look at is how well does McClain catch the ball, because Mike Tolbert caught a lot of passes down there. Now, I don't think McClain is that good of a pass catcher. If he's not catching the passes, then you got to like Ryan Matthews as maybe catching 50 passes and being a real nice player for you.
Right. And then on another note, we have an awful lot of keeper leagues in score sheet, and so the teams in those leagues traditionally in the first round, of course, are drafting guys that were just drafted in the NFL. So between Trent Richardson, Andrew Luck, and Robert Griffin III, which one do you think will help teams the most maybe this year and then in the future?
Well, let's put Doug Martin in there as well, because he's going to be one of those kind of running backs like Trent Richardson. They want to use him full time. He's going to catch passes. Most of these leagues do give you credit for either catching balls or at least getting the receiving yard. So those are 2 guys that are going to help you right away. Doug Martin of Tampa Bay, as well as Trent Richardson, is going to be a full-time back. Now, on the quarterbacks, I like Andrew Luck as a long-term guy. I think he's going to be one of those Brady, Breeze, Manning kind of guys. He's going to be there for 10, 15 years. If you could wind back the clock, would you take Randall Cunningham, or would you prefer to have a Manning-type guy? Well, for the short term, you'd like that rushing production. I think RG3, Robert Griffin III, will be better than Luck in the short term. Long term, though, I'm going to take the pocket passer who stays out of harm's way.
So does that apply a little bit to Cam Newton, too? You think that he won't really maintain his production that he had last year?
Well, if you look at the running quarterbacks, how many of those guys start 16 games year after year? There's been a lot of great running quarterbacks over the last 20 years. Steve Young, Dante Culpepper, Donovan McNabb, none of those guys start 16 games year after year. So if I had the choice between Andrew Luck and Cam Newton, I would treat Andrew Luck like the Brady, Breeze, Manning guy, and I would take him before Cam Newton. Although if we're looking at just this year, and then you look at all that rushing production, then you got to gamble on Cam Newton.
Right. Well, the passing quarterbacks, they generally take a while to develop. They don't usually pass for a gazillion yards their first year.
Well, they're getting better, though. And this is a special quarterback. This isn't a guy who just, this is not a Matthew Stafford type guy who's, this guy's going to be a good quarterback. This is the best guy who's been in the draft since John Elway. So he looks like a can't-miss type guy. He's got a lot of experience running the offense, calling the plays down at Stanford. I think he's going to be very good. Probably, I'll be surprised if he's not a top 15 quarterback as a rookie, and then maybe next year, he's getting pretty close to being those elite guys. Probably year 3 is when he's going to go over 30 touchdowns, I would think.
Wow, well, that's pretty impressive sounding. Well, I like the Doug Martin call. So if you're picking 4th this year in a keeper league, you shouldn't worry that those 3 guys I mentioned are gone. You should grab Doug Martin if he's still there, huh?
Definitely. He's one of those guys where if you want to win now, he's probably better than either of the quarterbacks. But again, it's that same sort of deal. If you look back to 1998, would you take Peyton Manning or would you take Fred Taylor? Fred Taylor's a running back. Running back's the position we're all trying to fill, and he did have a good career and some good years. So in some sense, it would make sense to take Fred Taylor instead of Peyton Manning and Ryan Leaf. Certainly Ryan Leaf. But over the last 10-plus years, I'd rather have Peyton Manning.
Yeah, well, I don't think anyone can argue with that. And then maybe to wrap up, you're up there in Seattle. What's going on with that quarterback battle up there?
I'm very intrigued by Russell Wilson. You know, they talk about short quarterbacks, and this is the ultimate test of can a short guy play quarterback. His arm strength is not an issue. His hands are actually bigger than the hands of any of the guys selected in the first round. He's got bigger hands than Andrew Luck or RG3. And then he was very productive and started a lot of games in college at 2 different schools. So I kind of think that Russell Wilson, he could develop into a very good quarterback and maybe start some games late this year and be their starter heading into the 2013 season.
Huh. And so you're not impressed with their more veteran type guys?
Well, I think Matt Flynn will be their starter heading into the year, and we'll see what he can do. Now, he did well in his limited playing time with the Packers. I put 480 yards and 6 touchdowns, was it, in that one game? Those are the best passing numbers ever. If you go back to the NFL merger, nobody's ever had 480 and 6 touchdowns. So in his one start last year, he put up better passing numbers than anybody. But that was with a great cast around him and against a bad pass defense. I'm not sure that he's the long-term guy. We'll see how it plays out. I'll say that Tavares Jackson's probably going to be the number 3 guy there.
So Flynn is going to beat out Jackson to start the year, you think?
I'm pretty sure, you know, when they give him that kind of money, they say they're going to let him compete, but I think he's better than Jackson. Jackson tends to have problems hanging onto the ball and taking sacks, and it really didn't move the offense with any confidence last year. Yeah, so I'll go with Flynn on the short term, but I am intrigued with Russell Wilson. I think he could be a 5'11" superstar. I think that how much difference does it make if a quarterback's eyes are here versus here? You know, seeing over offensive linemen or having balls batted down. I just don't buy into that. I think he could be a pretty good quarterback for him. Really like that as a 3rd-round draft pick.
Yeah, I mean, you are talking about just a couple inches, and it's not basketball where they're trying to rebound the ball.
Yeah, same sort of deal. I mean, can you have a point guard in the NBA who's 5'10" versus 5'11" or 6 feet? How much difference does it really make? He played behind the college football's largest offensive line last year at Wisconsin, so I'm very intrigued by that draft pick.
Huh. I hadn't really penciled him in. I thought he'd maybe be a long-term project. So good, I've learned 2 things now. Well, thanks for being with us, Ian. Appreciate it, and hopefully we'll talk to you guys down the road.
Talk to you soon, Jeff.
All right, thanks very much.